Stop what you are doing, because everything changed yesterday. On April 8th, 2026, after 40 days of the most devastating air war the Middle East has ever seen, the United States and Iran announced a 2-week ceasefire. Donald Trump called it a breakthrough, the mainstream media called it a victory, and George Galloway, one of Britain's most fearless political voices, called it exactly what it is: saving face. I'm 11 Alpha, and this is the Hormuz Files. And today we go deeper than any channel will dare to go. Because while the world is celebrating a pause in the bombing, we are going to show you why this ceasefire may be the most dangerous moment of this entire war. The trap has not opened. The trap has just changed shape. Let's start with the hard facts on the ground, because facts don't care about press releases. After 40 days of US-Israeli attacks on Iran that pushed the region to the brink of wider war, a 2-week ceasefire was brokered by Pakistan on April 8th, 2026. 2 weeks. Not a peace deal, not a resolution, a 2-week pause. While Trump posted on social media that almost all points of contention had been agreed, Iran told a completely different story. Professor Syed Mohammad Marandi, a University of Tehran academic, former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team, and a man who speaks from inside Tehran as the bombs fall, confirmed the ceasefire is based on Iran's own 10-point plan. Not America's 15-point plan, Iran's plan. Read that again. Iran, the country being bombed for 40 days by the most powerful military on earth, dictated the terms of the ceasefire. Now let's look at those terms. Iran says the US agreed to a commitment of non-aggression, continuation of Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz, acceptance of uranium enrichment, lifting of all primary sanctions, lifting of all secondary sanctions, and termination of all UN Security Council resolutions against Iran. If those terms are accurate, America didn't win this ceasefire. America surrendered to it. And George Galloway, the British parliamentarian and political firebrand who has spent decades exposing Western foreign policy, cut straight through the noise with one devastating question. Why would Iran agree to a ceasefire when they know US forces can come right back in? His answer: they wouldn't. Not unless the terms made it impossible for America to do so. In Episode 1, we introduced you to Professor Jiang, Scott Ritter, and Colonel McGregor. Today, the Hormuz Files adds 2 more voices to the file, because this story is too big for 3 perspectives. George Galloway needs no introduction to anyone who has followed Middle Eastern politics for the last 30 years. A former British Member of Parliament, founder of the Respect Party, and host of the mother of all talk shows, known as Moats, which has accumulated millions of views since February 28th. Galloway is a man who has stood in the Iraqi parliament, met Saddam Hussein, been expelled from the Labour Party for opposing the Iraq War, and has been proven right about Western military adventurism every single time. He is not a man who pulls punches, and on this ceasefire, he is unambiguous. Steve Witkoff has been sending desperate messages to Iran like a man texting an ex-girlfriend. Unless the US learns the lesson, the cycle is only going to continue. Pravda, USA. That is George Galloway, unfiltered, unflinching, and backed by 3 decades of being right. Our second new voice is Professor Syed Mohammad Marandi, born in Virginia, educated in Birmingham, now a professor at the University of Tehran and former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. A man who has been inside Iran's strategic thinking for decades. A man speaking to us from the city being bombed. Marandi has watched Iranians pour into the streets under bomb attacks, not to celebrate liberation as Trump fantasized, but in their tens and hundreds of thousands to condemn the strikes and commemorate their supreme leader as a martyr. This is the ground truth that Washington's intelligence community catastrophically failed to predict. And Marandi has been saying it from day one. Now let's talk about what was really at stake during these 40 days. Because the ceasefire didn't just pause a war, it paused something far more terrifying. Professor Morandi has laid out in forensic detail what full escalation would have meant, and his analysis is the most chilling thing you will hear from any analyst anywhere. Iran is in control of the situation and has far more escalation options than the United States, which will not be able to keep pace. An escalation would topple the Gulf petromonarchies and trigger a global economic collapse far worse than 1929. One can expect a worldwide energy shortage, biblical-scale famines, and an unprecedented wave of migration from Africa, Latin America, and Asia, at the very moment when Western economies would be collapsing. Biblical-scale famines. That is not dramatic language. That is a University of Tehran professor and former nuclear negotiation advisor telling you what Iran's escalation options actually look like when fully deployed. And he goes further. The Iranians believe that in the event of escalation, they will retain control, because there are far more assets on the other side of the Persian Gulf for Iran to destroy. The implications for the West would be far greater than what they can inflict on Iran. Iran has been under sanctions for decades and will slowly rebuild any vital infrastructure that is destroyed. But when the global economy collapses, and with it the US economy, that would be an unprecedented situation for the American people. It would destabilize the United States and could bring Trump's presidency to an end. Let that land. Iran's professor is telling you that Iran's worst-case scenario, being bombed for decades, is survivable. America's worst-case scenario, economic collapse, ends the presidency and potentially the republic. That is the asymmetry of this war that nobody on mainstream television will explain to you. And now, less than 24 hours after the ceasefire was announced, the cracks are already showing. Professor Morandi has been explicit. The ceasefire will not last if Israel continues its attacks on Lebanon. Iran will not move forward with a deal to end this war unless the cessation of hostilities applies to all fronts, including Lebanon. And what did Israel do within hours of the ceasefire announcement? Israel struck central Beirut without warning, and Netanyahu declared publicly that the US-Iran ceasefire does not include Lebanon. George Galloway called it the moment the truce died. By the time the sun had gone down, the ceasefire was dead. Meanwhile, on the ground, Kuwait faced 28 Iranian drone attacks, and the UAE faced 35 drone attacks on April 8th alone, causing extensive damage. Qatar confirmed intercepting 7 missiles and drones. A fire broke out at Abu Dhabi's Habshan gas complex, and a Saudi pipeline was directly hit. This is what a ceasefire looks like in the Middle East in 2026. Bombs still falling, drones still flying, and a 2-week window that Professor Jiang, Scott Ritter, and Colonel McGregor, whose analysis anchors every episode of this channel, would all recognize immediately. This is not peace. This is both sides reloading. So here is the Hormuz Files assessment of where we stand today, April 9th, 2026. The ceasefire is fragile to the point of fiction. Iran negotiated from a position of strength and got its own terms accepted. Israel is already violating the spirit of the agreement in Lebanon. Trump is claiming victory, while Iran claims the same victory from the opposite direction. Peace talks are scheduled for Islamabad over the weekend. Pakistan has invited both Iran and the US to Islamabad to negotiate a conclusive agreement to settle all disputes. Time and Professor Morandi, speaking from Tehran, says Iran will not accept anything less than its full 10 points. America will not accept Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz. Both sides cannot be right. Which means one of 3 things happens next. A genuine deal that reshapes the Middle East for a generation. A collapse of the ceasefire and a return to war, this time more brutal than before. or a prolonged, frozen conflict that leaves the global economy in permanent uncertainty and oil above $100 a barrel indefinitely. The Hormuz files will be here for every single development. Every week, we add another layer, another voice, another piece of the truth that the mainstream media buries beneath its talking points and government briefings. George Galloway says the cycle continues unless America learns the lesson. Professor Morandi says Iran has more escalation options than the world realizes. And we say the story is far from over. Subscribe to the Hormuz Files. Share this video with someone who thinks the ceasefire means the war is over. Drop a comment below. Do you believe this ceasefire holds, or does the Hormuz crisis reignite within 2 weeks? I will see you in the next file.